So once again, thank you so much for joining. I'm very happy to see you. So many faces that I already known and met, some new faces. So very, very happy, very excited to see you guys today. As you know, and in this particular session, we're going to be talking about an exploration that focused on international development as a sector. So all of the organizations that work together or alongside each other to solve major social, environmental, economic challenges, right? Humanitarian challenges. And so, with this in mind, I wanted us to begin with a short explanation of the title. Why on earth are we talking about the forest and telling the forest run with trees? And so, with that, the thing that struck me in the last year, there were a few. One of the first ones that stood out to me was that we've had a fire run across the forest, right? We had the cuts in the funding, we had exacerbation of international conflicts, we have political chaos. There were so many things happening. And because of them, some of the things that were already not really working well were exposed. Some were burned to the ground to really create space for something new to emerge. But I had a feeling that we keep focusing on specific trees, right? Or on our own organization, or on the very specific SDG that we're trying to address, or whatever that might be, right? And somehow in these discussions, we might have been missing the entire forest, the dynamic within the entire forest. And so with that in mind, I wanted to take a step back and try to understand what's going on, what's burnt, what's emerging, what are some of the things that perhaps we can facilitate and nurture so that this forest is actually diverse and is growing and is lush and joy and is helpful to everyone. And so that's the metaphor that to me in a way ties this entire exploration. And clearly right now we're in a quote unquote liminal forest. We don't know what's going to happen with the entire development work and with the sector, with the trees and the bushes, if you will. And so with that, I started looking, as you typically do in a forest guide, I started looking into signals of change, major trends, all of all of these things. And at some point, I was struck by how it doesn't really feel like foresight. And as I was putting all of this together, creating a report, this feeling very much grew on me that whenever I wanted to reach out for something that seemed very far in the distance, it immediately pulled me back into a burning issue that we have today. And not only current issue, but also historical issues. And so with that in mind, I decided, or with that experience, I decided to lean into this and say, okay, let's not force it. I mean, sure, there are signals of change. There are some trends that I noted, but let's not overvalue the form or the tag of a foresight research over the actual use that I wanted to have. So that's one thing that might be sort of correcting expectations. If you're looking for very weak signals of change, I mean, you'll be disappointed. There are not too many here. And then just this morning, I was talking with a friend of mine, Monika Burecka. She's also working in Foresight, and we were talking about something different. But at some point, she said, "Listen, do we any longer need Foresight experts, or do we actually need change agents?" And I felt that pretty much summarized my experience with that particular report. It feels more like trying to capture the areas that we can build agency around rather than being an intellectual exploration and intellectual exercise that allows us to venture out into possible future scenarios. Now, I've always been saying that foresight, at least to me, I mean, we can disagree all day long on that, but to me, foresight should never be a report, in the sense that sure, you need an output here and there. Sure, you need to present something every now and then, but foresight is a muscle. Foresight is a process. Foresight to me is something that allows you to transform things, to engage people, to change any specific area, topic, right? Challenge, address it. So it's in a way, to me, by definition, it's undone. But I wanted to take it one step further and say, listen, if it's undone, let's keep it undone. Let's keep it as something that will actually be a continuous work. And so with that, I will not be sharing a PDF with you, not a chance. What I will be sharing with you is a document that you can actively comment on and provide your inputs for. Not only that, I also created, and I'll share that with you later on, but I also created a Miro board that belongs to us all, and that we can continuously develop and edit and take parts of it and use it for whatever we want to do. So from that perspective, I reject the idea of a finished PDF of a foresight reform. Exactly, a living system. Thanks, Lucy. And so that means, in the end, that sure, I'm the one presenting today, but in the end, the ideal scenario for me is that as this document evolves, it's not my name, or not only my name in the report, it's also your names, in the sense that whoever wants to contribute, develop that body of knowledge can do it easily and can make it their own and can become part of this exploration. So that's stage setting, if you will. This is where we are. This is how I'm thinking about this particular process, and a document nonetheless, but a living one to share with you. Now, what I wanted to share with you today is some of the, I'd say, highlights, some of the high-level clusters that I've included in the document. I will first walk you through a little bit of the high-level picture. Then I will show you a bit of what you can expect in the document itself. And then I'll cover 6 major clusters that I've put together. And so with that, the very first thing that I wanted to share with you is the map of the forest, if you will, is the map of the signals of change, the processes, phenomena, technologies that I've captured and that I started exploring in terms of the relationships between them. And in the end, what emerged at this point for me were these 6 clusters and the relationships that help me also understand which of the nodes, if you will, in that network are the most connected with anything else. This type of reasoning, this type of qualitative analysis. I don't need to explain that to you, but this is pretty much where I wanted to say where I started, but that was long into the process. But this is where I started organizing the knowledge. Let's put it that way. And so with that, not to keep you also without something to immediately capture, I'm in the chat, I'm putting a link to that Miro board. You can immediately also see if there's a space for you to also play with it. But with that, once I had the map and the clusters that emerged for me, I started defining and capturing some of the key highlights underneath each of the clusters. And this is mostly what I'm going to be sharing with you today. The structure of the report, as you will find, will be as follows. You will first see a cluster card like this one that briefly explains what is captured in this particular cluster of signals, of trends, different processes, as well as connected dots. These connected dots you will find on the next pages as signal cards or trend cards, right? So short descriptions of what that actually means. And you will see cards like this one that have a short explanation, as well as some visuals that either further explain or exemplify what the card is talking about. On some cards, quite many actually, you will also find a small space for your own reflection, because if at any point you feel like this is something you would like to also use in your own teams to discuss something, use it as a workbook. I mean, it's absolutely perfect to do. And so with that, let me now go into the key clusters. And let me explain that briefly, because we don't have all of the time in the world and I can talk about it. So I need to self-limit. And then I'll share with you also a few words about how I envision the next steps. So the very first cluster I called complexity fatigue. And it's almost self-explanatory in the sense that we do feel overwhelmed with the number of things that are bombarding us from many different angles, the interdependencies between many different activities and processes that are happening around us, the speed of changes, the information overflow. All of this is overwhelming to an extent, to the extent that it has its own name, and the name is complexity. We just have enough of complexity on so many different levels. And now, so what are some of the major signals or processes or trends that I've noted under this cluster? The first one is compensatory control mechanism, and that in brief means that when we're overwhelmed like that, we are desperately trying to find something that gives us reassurance, structure, stability. And unfortunately, that often means authoritative, charismatic leaders. That means corrupt but stable and predictable organizations. That means believing in conspiracy theories. And so with that, when you think about international development work, this is something that could be a huge challenge for us when we're designing our work. Second point is AI relief. In a way, we're relieved that we now have this technology, right? Because it, in some ways, saves us time. It provides simple answers. You no longer need to look for information, search for hours, right? It seems to simplify things. And so it often gives relief, but then there are risks that come with it. And I'm showing you in the article fantastic work done by Youth Lab, which is also a Foresight collective that explores AI narratives that people have, and how they actually relate to the future of our relationship with AI. Then we have affective polarisation. So often we talk about cognitive polarisation, disagreeing with others. But there's another type of polarization, and it's the affective one. It's no longer about do I agree with you. Now it's about, do I still like you even though I disagree with you? And the answer, unfortunately, so often is not. I'm showing you some of the definitions and some of the information about how we would turn to disliking or even hating the ones that disagree with us, and asking what that means for us as development workers or change agents. The next one, the next signal is the rise or the notion that we now rely more on personal relationships. There is a rise of relational anything, relational projects, relational policies, relational agendas, because with all of this overwhelm, this complexity, fatigue, with chaos, we're looking for a place that gives us some type of reassurance, some type of clarity, some type of trust. And so with that, even if it's the simplest thing of hiring, not the simplest, but if it's the case of hiring people, again, we might be even more likely to turn to those that we know and move beyond AI generated cover letters, right? And then finally, the rebirth of communities of practice. This is one of my favorites. Honestly, this is something that I've been observing in our space and also across different sectors, that because of all of these things that I just discussed, the fatigue, the overwhelm, the disconnect, the polarization, we are reconnecting into groups that share values and share experiences. These might be professional, but they don't have to, right? And so the old communities of practice, the old school communities of practice might no longer be fit for the purpose, but people are very creative and very innovative in figuring out how exactly are we going to collaborate. And I'm giving you an example there as well of one collective that has recently been launched that discusses democratic innovation. So that's our first cluster. The second cluster that I'm sharing with you in the report broadly considers mental health and neurodivergence. And this is something that has been really, really growing and emerging for a long time. But it's only now exacerbated by the complexity, overwhelm, and all of the crises that are multiplying around us. And so in this section, I start with a discussion about burnout. As no surprise, I mean, this is a challenge, a problem, a struggle that is faced by so many of us. And so with that, I'm doing an introduction into how to conceptualize burnout in our context, but also what it might mean practically for us as a sector. I then move on to one of the things that are very closely tied with burnout, and that's fair remuneration. One of the things that are being, I think, more and more openly discussed. And I've done quite a few interviews with colleagues, and so many of them brought that up, is that we are unhappy with the differences between how, for example, local staff is paid and international staff is paid. Or if you want to look at the cross section of international organization and local administration or local NGOs, volunteers, participants of our projects, participatory projects, then this becomes an issue. This question of, you expect me to spend X number of days because it's my community and do it without any remuneration. But at the same time, I need to put food on the table. I need to take care of my own household. That doesn't seem fair. At the same time, others are being paid for that type of work. So these types of discussions are bubbling up. They have always been there, but it feels like with everything going on, this is gaining more and more traction. The next point here are post-hope narratives. This is a fascinating exploration, and I also include a very interesting reading about hope in the report. Because when you think about it, hope is a system skill. Hope happens when you cannot see the exact results of what you're doing right now. You cannot see it yet, but you hope this will happen, right? So it requires you to really understand the broader system, understand the dynamics, and place hope in them, in your team, or in the process, or in whatever additional circumstance, right? And so the post-hope narratives are something that is extremely interesting and that should in many ways be worrying, because post-hope takes us away from complexity that we just said is overwhelming. It silos us. It takes away agency. And so in so many ways, post-hope is a challenge that is very much worth looking at in this particular context. And then finally, with that discussion about how we feel, how we think, right? The last thing that is emerging, not only in our sector, all across the sectors, is the recognition of neurodivergence and the fact that not only within our own teams, we are neurodivergent and we have different needs, right? That's one thing. But then when we work with local communities, the way we structure our work, the way we organize our town halls and consultation sessions and whatnot, this is designed with a person that is neurotypical in mind. It doesn't really, most often I'm generalizing here, but it doesn't really provide enough space for people who are neurodivergent to actually engage and collaborate and contribute to whatever we are working on. And so some of the shifts in that space, the recognition of neurodivergence, are also included in that particular cluster. Now, a third one, most likely my favorite one, is flashy laggards. Flashy laggards, to me, is a symbol of those organizations that seem to be transforming and seem to be reforming, but it's just for show, right? So think of creating a very sexy, flashy AI generated visualization of 4 different scenarios of whatever you're discussing, your city. That's my topic. This is something that you can show and promote, and it looks really, really good. But at the same time, more often than not, it doesn't move beyond excitement and some really surface level reflection. Oh, that's interesting. That would be nice. That's impossible, right? And so Flashy Laggards is a cluster that shows that this liminal state that we're in requires a very different approach, and it requires us to really dig deep and really transform things, right? Not only, change the code. And so with that, I'm showcasing 3 things. One is an increase in marketing positions in many different organizations, which is interestingly coinciding with the cuts in aid, right? So many organizations investing more in marketing, in PR, and in showing how they're changing things. Second thing that I'm showing and I'm referring to is the isomorphic mimicry. This is the topic that I also focus on in terms of the research. So you will find a shameless flag in the document where I invite you to also join me in researching and exploring that notion. But in short, for those of you who are not familiar, isomorphic mimicry means that we're doing something just to tick the box so that the external form is accomplished without actually checking if it generates the intended impact. So think about online platforms for consultations, right? Many would brag that they have a new online consultation platform for the citizens, right? But at the same time, quite often, I would even say more often than not, these platforms do not translate into increased participation. And even if they do that in the first month or 2, and then they die out. So it's prioritizing the form, oh, I have new tech, over the actual function, oh, I have more people engaged in a discussion. And so that is something that will further prevent us from transforming, right? We will remain laggards, however flashy, right? If we use that type of a logic. And then finally, the third thing that I'm sharing with you in that section is our cultural orphans. And in this part, what I'm discussing is the fact that we have a generational change, right? And I'll be coming back to this over and over. But there are so many people, and some that I also talked with, interviewed, that are from the new generation who joined or planned to join international organizations or big international charities because they believe that these are organizations that will match their value system and that will match their hunger for impact. and hunger for change. But as they join some of these organizations, they become disillusioned, they become cynical, frustrated, and they leave. And they leave to a plethora of options. Um, we're not living in a time when you would have a big international charity or international organization and then nothing. No, we live in dynamic times where you have many other options. These options then also tie back to what we discussed earlier, the communities of practice and all these things. And so this is a very interesting thing when you look at the generational changes within well-established organizations. How is that playing together? How is this change happening? And what is the landscape that is emerging that is built by these quote unquote cultural orphans? So that's the third cluster. The fourth one dives deeper into cultural aspects of change. And in this cluster, I'm sharing with you some of the signals and processes and trends that relate to the discrepancy, the crack between how we used to do and used to talk about development in this Western focused and Western value based ways, and how this new wave, this new power shift is emerging for communities, countries, individuals who want to actually take back the ownership of their context, their circumstance, their own change, right? And so with that, I'm sharing with you a bit on the narratives and communication about quote unquote crushing colonialism, decoloniality, anti-colonialism, all of these things. Second of all, I'm touching upon the aspect of decoloniality and indigenous work in tech and especially in AI. This again goes back to the work of Lab that I mentioned earlier. How this can be actually quite tricky for international staff to also go with the right tools, interpret things in a way that is inclusive and respectful. Third of all, in this cluster, we have the international aid fatigue. That's something that I don't think I need to explain to anyone, but it ties well with all of the other items and the shocks, the financial shocks that happened last year in terms of the funding exposed this fatigue quite well, showed that the system as it's structured right now does not really hold if donors start backing out, which creates an incredible risk, not only for international staff, sure, but for the ones with whom and for whom all of this was created. So that's the third point under that cluster. And then finally, a small thing, but I think subtle but important, is the card that I entitled "Worlds Apart." Worlds apart, and that basically means that somehow previously it was enough for us to be in one organization, no matter where you're based, to play along. Now, it's no longer the case. We want to be understood, and we want to be understood from our own cultural perspective. And so to make it more tangible, perhaps, I once had last year I had an interview with one of the colleagues from an international charity, and she was mentioning how colleagues from different time zones, as in different cultural regions, would no longer engage and participate, right? And that what she was missing was understanding what is valuable for them so that they participate, what is important in communication with them so that they re-engage in all of these challenges. And so this intercultural competency is emerging as something that we need to relearn or upskill in as international staff, because the shortcuts, the white savior thing. That's not only disgusting, but it's passé. That's basically not working anymore, right? And so with that, we're actually swiftly moving to the fifth cluster, which is focused around, so who is actually the expert one? And now it's not the white old guy from an Ivy League school in the US. That's no longer the expert, right? We are at the point when we're redefining expertise, giving back the gravity of expertise to people who are expert in their own context. And so I opened this section with my absolute favorite TED talk. I won't be spoiling all of that. The title is Shut Up and Listen. If you haven't seen it, it's 13 years old, so it's ancient, but I would very much encourage you to watch it. And it pretty much comes down to this shift in where do we source expertise now, right? So that's one. Second thing that is happening in terms of this, again, generational shift is a wave of new influencers. And these are so interesting because, if you're 30 plus, you're most likely using LinkedIn, maybe Instagram, right? For your connections, LinkedIn for professional connections. But that's not the case for the younger generation that is already building their professional lives. And I'm sharing some screenshots and comments around how the Gen Z, the younger generation, however we want to call them, is reshaping communication, sharing knowledge, how different formats are actually emerging for sharing knowledge that to many of us would be unthinkable, absolutely unthinkable. And yet for them, they are native, they are comfortable, they are expected almost, right? And so these new influencers are also a growing group, and at the same time, a group that I sense is not really visible from the international established IO or INGO perspective. They might be doing their own thing without anybody noticing up until some point. And then finally, I would be remiss not to include non-human stakeholders as source of insights, as new stakeholders, as new legal persons. And I'm showing in that one of my favorite examples of non-human stakeholders engaged in a democratic deliberation. This is something that feels like a nuance, feels like something that might not be that popular yet, but there are hubs where this is becoming a mainstream type of thinking, that we're not just humans that need to be taken into consideration. We include other species or rivers or whatever that might be, right? So I'm exploring that a little bit in the fifth section. And then the final one, a frank for your thoughts. That's a section that, one, exposes my age, two, talks a little bit about how things are changing in the financial aspects of international development. As you know, the finances of international development are, a huge separate thing themselves. So I'm not doing a full-blown exploration here. I highlighted four things that are not even that far into the future. They are already quite mainstream, but from my perspective, are really worth taking a deeper dive into. And so the first one is alternative finance, again, fintech, and the technologies that allow us to source funds in a distributed, transparent way from many different people or other organizations are something that, in the context of instability, in the context of cuts in ODA, they rise to rank of something really, really important, also in the context of de-risking and limiting the risk that another cut would make major shock. We're not there yet, I think, but still, it's an area that is growing in a very interesting way. Second thing that I mentioned are intangibles, investing in intangibles. Those of you who have worked in development, international development for years or decades, know that the KPIs should be the outputs, the outcomes. This should be measurable, no? And we have to measure it well and all of these things. Now, this might not be that obvious any longer. And there are donors who are quite openly, audaciously, maybe even looking into rethinking what we measure and what we invest in. Be that kindness. How do you measure that? I don't know. Do you even? But then once you invest in kindness, how does that change the game? So these are questions that might seem philosophical, but at the same time, even knowing from the list of you joining today, I know some of you are very much interested in actually investing in, say, relational infrastructure, trust, kindness, right? Hope. And so how do we go about it? How do we then assess or be able to claim that our intervention was successful? What success even means? I mean, I'm going in on a very weird tangent, so I'll stop here. And so with that, there's two more things that I'm mentioning in that section. One is regenerative finance. And that's a small, maybe not so small, but that's a tweak in a sense, right? At least from what's been happening so far, that we are rebalancing the focus more towards let's create the conditions for things to regrow, let's regenerate, let's invest in the soil so that it's able to bear fruit on its own, rather than let's patch things up and move on, right? And so this is an important shift in terms of what we define as a success again. So I'm sharing a little bit of that as well. And then finally, something that by no means is a signal or future signal. It's something that's been with us forever. But at the same time, it sounds like it's resurfacing, and that is tide 8. So for those of you who might be not familiar with that expression, tide 8 means that if my country is providing funds for your country's development, we expect you to procure services back in my country. Right? So that's tide 8. And it resurfaces and it's becoming more of a topic, mostly because we are asked to defend the idea of ODA. The funds that are being spent for international cooperation and international development are being questioned by the citizens from whose taxes these funds are being donated or shared. And so from that perspective, this tension between how do I justify the quote unquote expense and what might be the benefit of doing that to my own for my own country is growing or seems to be growing. With EU looking into that, they've been looking into that for over a year, I think now, in a very vocal way. So that's that. These are the 6 clusters. And as I mentioned, I mean, the specific cards are in there. I'm realizing that I already broke the promise that I made in the beginning. Oh, I talk too much. I always do. So I'll just very quickly wrap things up for you so that I can check in with you at the end. Next steps. As I mentioned at the beginning, I do not intend for this to be a static report. I want it to be something that we make our own, develop further, and so on and so forth. And so to that end, I will be suggesting to all of you who showed up today, but also all of the ones that subscribed for the event and beyond, to start collaborating around that document moving forward. So I will be inviting you to co-working sessions, co-design sessions, horizon scanning sessions, in which we will be further discussing what's missing in this report, what new things are emerging, what maybe is redundant in this report, and we should simply set aside because it was just my subjective fantasy, whatever that might be. Okay, so I won't be diving into that secondary for now. I would love to now turn to you guys and see if you have any comments or questions. One final thing. I am now building a community for development practitioners. It's now in the beta testing stage, but in March I'll be launching it. If you're interested to learn more and so on, I also share the link. And I shut up now. Opening to you. Thank you so much for sticking around. Are there any comments, questions, or reflections about what I shared? Please jump in.
It was a wonderful wonderful work, Justyna, and heartfelt, delivered with great heartfelt. What I would say is, typically in development, there are almost certain mechanics, a lot of noise. So in a way, you're really calming them and kind of creating a traffic control that is very much human, as opposed to from an engineering perspective. And I think that's, I mean, I'm not in development, but as part of crisis management, it's something that I delve into and have to listen to development professionals and be part of development teams. So in that regard, it's going to be very, very helpful, and from the broader stakeholders, both the providers, sponsors, international bodies, but also recipients. So there's very fertile ground to bring in wonderful conversation, and especially delivered by you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as I mentioned, this is now yours. So do whatever you please with it. You can take it apart, you can rebuild it. And I'm always happy to also join in any conversations. And before I let another person in, I'll just answer the question in the chat. So sure, I will be sending out the invites to these other sessions to all of you who have registered through Lumo. So you will receive that, because I know, yeah, LinkedIn has its shortages. So sure, I'll be sharing that. Are there any other comments, questions coming from you guys? Okay, I've exhausted you. Not good. Perfect. So, colleagues, so with that, let me share the link to the report in the chat as well, so you can access it. It is open for comments, because it might be tricky with many different editors editing at once. So for now, it's open for comments, and I'll be then including the comments into the text itself. However, the Miro board that I shared with you has a section that is fully open for your edits. So do whatever you want with it. I've kept the copy in case anybody accidentally deletes everything. Don't worry about it. But we can still work with that. And finally, unless somebody wants to jump in, I have one more link to share with you. As I mentioned, I am doing research on isomorphic mimicry right now. I'm actually sending out the questionnaires in a week or two, the first questionnaires. And so if you're interested in exploring that and also supporting me in that work, I'm putting in a very short form, name and email, so that you can let me know that you also want to be part of that work and want to learn more about the entire concept. I'll be more than happy to share. I can talk a lot, as you can see. Perfect. Colleagues, thank you so much for joining today. I'm truly touched. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the day. If you have any feedback that you want to share in different channels, I'm very much looking forward. Take care.